Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. We've recently broke down the new top 10 best loadouts to be running in Warzone. If you haven't caught that video yet, feel free to go and check it out. But with the season 2 meta update across Warzone, we obviously saw some new weapons added in and then a bunch of different weapon changes to various different meta options or even some off meta options as well. And today I wanted to go through and break down the entirety of the new meta here in Warzone. We're here on Community with my custom meta ranking tier list here with all of the MW2, MW3, and Black Ops 6 guns. And I've got my handy dandy list of every single change that occurred with the season 2 update in addition to the new weapons being added. So we got to go through, we got to re-rank some things. Some things stayed the same, some things definitely changed in terms of what to look out for with the current meta. First things first though, let's rank these new weapons. Unfortunately, I don't think any of these brand new weapons between the Cypher, the PPSH, and then also the Fang are going to be like that crazy new #1 spot. They're all decent, especially two of them, but they're not going to be like crazy broken or anything. So first up, the Cypher, I would say this is more so a meta option here, a meta contender, but it's not going to be an absolute meta choice. It is really good and really easy for like sniper support, some more mid-range, but it's not something like maybe an XM4 or a GPR or whatever else might be absolute meta, right? That you're going to be using close range, mid-range, long range, 40 meters, 80 meters, 100 meters and beaming with. It's going to fall off a bit more over range. It's definitely a more aggressive style rifle, but it's pretty good for what it is, and it's also, like I said, super easy to use. Now the PPSH is honestly going to fall right in that same sort of category there in that general meta contender area, similar to some of these other SMGs that we've got in here, the SOG for instance, the KSV and what have you. It's right up in there in the mix there. However, for what it's worth, it is going to be a little bit more inconsistent. Like it and the compact I think are very similar to one another, but with its fire rate, it values accuracy so much, and if you do miss bullets, the TTK is going to be noticeably impacted there as opposed to some more forgiving weapons. So it's solid again for sure, especially like you could build a hip fire build, you could build a more mobility based build, but some of the attachments being a bit weird with like all the rear grips and the stocks being combined, it is a little bit more limited than some other subs for some reason, but still good if you're purely looking at TTK and damage output. And then for the Fang, quite frankly, this is definitely my least favorite of these weapons. I would consider this to be more of just like a base contender here, down in the mix with some of the other LMGs like the PU-21 or the GPMG, but for completely different reasons. This just feels weird. Its damage is not going to be anything crazy or anything awful, but it's just weird feeling. And if a weapon's not comfortable, it's probably not going to be meta. It's a little bit too slow and heavy, but it still feels like it's supposed to be a rifle and not an LMG, if that makes any sense. Statistically though, it's decent enough to, use and you can get some kills with it, but there are certainly going to be some better options across the board. But with that out of the way, let's focus more on all of the weapon changes now. I've got my list of notes detailing all the various weapon buffs and nerfs, and let's re-rank some of these because certain things are definitely changing a bit here as we do go through with all these weapon change details. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always seriously appreciated, really helps share the video around to new viewers and grow the channel. And if you are a new viewer or perhaps you have not subscribed yet, we should change that. Every single day I got you covered with news, updates, patch notes, meta breakdowns. It's all here, so feel free to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. So first up here, the AK-74 actually got a range buff, a lower torso multiplier buff, and then also an ADS and a sprint to fire buff. The AK's damage is already pretty crazy, and quite frankly, I think this is a buff that does bring it into true absolute meta contention. It's a top 2 rifle, I think, objectively. It's definitely more difficult to control than some other ones, but it's a higher risk, higher reward style option, and it's not too terribly difficult to control, especially if you're throwing on like Gunfighter or something, right? I really like this buff for the AK-74. Now the AIM's currently sitting in the contender category, did get a leg and a headshot multiplier buff. It's not going to be a buff that drastically increases it. I think it's maybe a little bit closer to being in the meta contender category, but just being as a base contender here, I still think that's more of an appropriate description for it. Its damage is still a little bit lacking despite the fact that it is incredibly easy to use. It really went crazy with this one. The AS Val got a reload buff. That's not going to really change anything about where it's placed. I like this one a lot. The Goblin, which already has one of the best TTK stats in the entire game, actually got even better. It got a mid damage buff, a range buff, a velocity buff, and then an arm and a hand multiplier buff. So the Goblin is just better across the board. Again, a much higher skill gap weapon though. It being semi-auto, it requires a fast trigger finger and accuracy while doing so. Definitely the most difficult out of everything in the absolute meta category, but also has one of, if not the highest upside in the game for those players who can truly take advantage of its, best properties in terms of of its damage output and insane TTK in the mid-range. Unfortunately, the GPR91 did actually end up getting a range nerf, an ADS nerf, a sprint to fire nerf, and a leg multiplier nerf. I think that's something that's going to bring it down into the meta contender category, just because it being so versatile was one of its definite upsides and one of its real strengths previously, and a lot of that's gone now. It's not going to be as good for sniper support. It's not going to be as good over range, so bit of a bummer there. Still a decent rifle, but not an absolute meta option. The Model L is definitely creeping up. I don't think it's jumping up into the absolute meta area quite yet, but it did get a buff to its range and then also its leg multiplier, which is solid. I like that. It's definitely getting closer and closer to being up here. It's just really either needing one more damage buff or a slight nerf to some of what's already sitting here over the mid to long range meta. Like if the XM4 got a crazy recoil nerf, the Model L might slide into its spot atop the meta, but for now, I think it's just a really close contender and still a very good option. Now, speaking of XM4 nerfs, we did see one with this update. It got a general range nerf, a leg multiplier nerf. They nerfed the 100 round mag ADS speed, but you can just jump down to the 60 and that's still gonna be plenty of ammo. They also nerfed the control benefits that the buffer weight stock offers, but none of that knocks the XM4 out of the true meta category here. It's still the easiest gun to use with buffer weight on there. It's still insanely reliable over range. It's not going to have the fastest TTK, but it's a laser beam, and people are going to value that accuracy and that ease of use over, you know, a higher skill gap weapon like the Goblin or maybe the AK. So it's a beast still. It's not as good as it was before, objectively, but this was not a nerf that's going to really shift players away from the XM4 a ton. This next update's one that I really do like. The C9 got a range buff, a speed buff, a velocity buff, a leg multiplier buff. This is truly a meta option now for SMGs, and I love that because I just honestly do enjoy using the C9. The feel of it, how it plays, I love it. I'm glad that this is truly up there competing with the best options. Now, the Jackal, probably its closest competition, ended up getting a range nerf, an arm and a torso multiplier nerf, and a velocity nerf, all of which will be felt. The Jackal is no longer that clear definitive #1 SMG. I think it's still an absolute meta option. However, I think you've got some really good choices between the Jackal, the C9, the PP919, honestly, even the KSV. It's a little bit, slower up close than some of these other choices, despite the fact that it did get a buff. It got a range buff, an ADS, and a sprint to fire buff, and a velocity buff. That really helps it in its sniper support range. These are going to be a bit better up close, but still, I mean, the KSV is right there as well. So there's really good close range diversity now with the SMG category, and that's nice to see finally. Also, the compact, completely forgot to mention that there, but that also got a sprint to fire and then an ADS buff, so it's even more aggressive while also having one of the fastest TTKs in the game. So that's great to see too. The PP919 did actually see some interesting changes. It got a mid-range nerf, a headshot nerf, and a leg nerf for the multipliers there, but it's still very good, especially up close. Even as some sniper support, it's just a very well-rounded SMG. That nerf's not going to be too drastic and knock it out of the contention here into the conversation atop the best weapons. So bummer that it got a slight nerf, but still very good. The XMG also was adjusted here too with the buffer weight stock. They nerfed the control benefits that offers, but its damage is still phenomenal and it's still ridiculously easy to use. Then lastly, I have to search for this one. I'm not gonna lie. Oh, it's all the way down in trash. The 9mm PM pistol. It got a range buff, a headshot buff, and an upper torso multiplier buff. Why, you might ask? I'd ask the same thing, because frankly, I don't know. This pistol still is not good. Its fire rate's bad, its mag capacity is bad. It's one of the worst options in the entire game, quite frankly. And that buff, I don't know why they felt the need to buff that pistol alone and still not make it good enough to even compete with some of the other options, but they did, and it doesn't really change anything. So, all right, bit of post-edit Zach here, because initially once I had recorded this meta breakdown, everything was in order, but then they went through and they dropped some more patch notes, essentially nerfing the XM4 a little bit. They also made some slight buffs to the PPSH. Everything still kind of stands there. It is very good. It's so close to being in this meta category. It's just, its feel is a little bit off, a tad bit there, but really what we want to focus on is the XM4 primarily. Here's the thing though, I think this update is probably the closest we've had a gun to teetering between absolute meta and general meta. I personally would not be choosing the XM4 currently over the AK in some situations, and especially the Model L. I think this one absolutely needs to jump up into this meta category here with the buffs that it's seen now, and also some nerfs to the XM4. I think there is a conversation to be had with the XM4 on the border here. You could make an argument for being absolute meta because it's still going to be super easy to use by comparison. It's just going to be a lot slower, and its close to mid-range TTK is not going to be that great. Its long-range TTK will still be competitive enough when you factor in accuracy, though, that you could say, okay, yes, it's meta. A lot of players will still flock to this versus, you know, there's maybe some other choices like the AK, way better TTK, the Goblin, way better TTK, the XMG even, and definitely the Model L that maybe are a little bit more advantageous or desirable as of now. But it's definitely close, but it's nice to see that there actually is this conversation now. It's not just XM4, oh yeah, nothing is gonna match that. So nice updates there that I wanted to make sure we had fully updated for this general conversation. There were some slight shifts in this overall meta update. I don't think there were enough though. There is some more competition in the SMG category for sure. The sniper meta is still feeling good. So some things changed. A lot stayed the same, however. But that said, that is going to wrap things up for this video. If you enjoyed the information, you found it helpful, a like is always seriously appreciated. And if you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button on your way out so you can always guarantee you're in the know for everything going on in COD. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.